Yeah, thanks for taking my call. I like the show. I heard about you guys from my son. Kind of come from a Christian background on both sides of my family. And then there was a time in my life where I dabbled with atheism. And then it kind of made my way back to the theism side of things. And my oldest son, he's turned about the age of 18, and he's taken anthropology in college, and he's a very smart kid. And well, now he's taken his turn and dabbling in theism. And so that's how I got introduced to your show. And I appreciate all of what you guys talk about. You guys have thoughtful discussions, good faith discussions. You hold your ground, and I appreciate that. So I'm hoping to get in the ring here and see how I can do. So basically what I want to talk about is the line of demarcation about like what is science and what is not pseudoscience, and when should someone be tarred and feathered as a creationist, or when should they be allowed to speak on scientific matters, and how you go about deciding that. Like what's the gripe with James Tour or the Discovery Institute, or take your pick?
Yeah. Creationists can talk about science anytime they're actually talking about scientists, or anytime they're actually talking about science. So if there's a creationist who wants to accurately represent biology or geology, they're free to do that. When they say that creationism is science, or that the aspects of creationism that they're pointing to should be considered science, then they're wrong. And so the scientific process is, there is no single scientific method, but science is a process of trying to understand the world. And for that, we use the best tools that we have available: logical reasoning, sound epistemology, evaluation of evidence, etc. Science is a rigorous process that involves some key principles. Is the proposal testable? And that includes falsifiability. If it's not falsifiable, it's not testable. So is your hypothesis testable? Until then, it's not a real hypothesis. It's a pseudo hypothesis. And so if it's testable and falsifiable, and it has then been tested and subjected to peer review and replication, where other scientists can replicate the testing and reproduce the results, then the findings qualify as scientific findings. They are still tentative. They are still subject to revision when we get new information. But at no point is creationism is the notion that there's a being, an untestable, unfalsifiable being outside of space and time that is responsible for creating everything. That concept is not currently accessible through scientific inquiry. There's no way we can test for something outside of space-time. There's no way we can test for anything that is proposed to be supernatural. And in the entire history of the world, no proposed supernatural event or cause for an event has ever been demonstrated to be both true and supernatural. And so that's where we draw the line. The pseudoscience is when an idea, whether it's homeopathy, whether it's cupping or Reiki, whether it's a resurrection or the creation of a god, pseudoscience is when an idea has not done its due diligence to demonstrate its efficacy through good scientific practices.
Brandon, is there a scientific fact, principle, thing that you feel has been rejected by science, that you feel has met the standards of science and has been unfairly rejected?
Well, maybe not by like science in general, but I can give you a specific example. So let's say something like a proposal by a creationist guy. Maybe he thinks that like there is a God, and maybe he thinks that God created the universe, and that somehow like the physical observations that we see are going to line up with that in some way. And so his science flows, down from...
his science or the science?
Well, the science that he's doing.
No. That's not... Right. Are you talking about a
What
subjective?
science is that person? Like, give me an example when you say the science he's doing.
Well, like, let's say that someone tries to do some math and figure out the waiting time problem with, like, fossil data, or that, let's say they try to do some sort of calculations with, like, the blood cascade, because they're trying to, like, mathematically demonstrate some sort of constraint on the understanding of evolution that they've read in the literature. Is that pursuit pseudoscience if they're going about it in a methodical, scientific way, but their ideas and their thoughts that are leading them to that pursuit maybe flow downstream from theistic ideas up the river? Does that make sense?
Well, if they're doing it's entirely possible. For example, and this may be incorrect, it may not line up perfectly. The former head of the Human Genome Project, Francis Crick, is a good scientist, but he also believes in the Trinity, and he believes that because he came across, not Francis Crick, Francis Collins, my apologies. Francis Collins believes in the Trinity because he was out for a bicycle ride and came across a waterfall that was frozen into 3 columns, and it reminded him of the Trinity, and he hit his knees and prayed. And he's convinced that there's a God, and he's convinced that Jesus is God, and that this Trinitarian view is real. But he holds those views, and it doesn't impact his ability to look at the genome and study the science accurately. So there are people who, and he thinks that God basically invented or created genetics. But his belief that God created genetics has no impact on the science that he's actually doing, because that doesn't change which genetic letters or which chromosomes you're working with or any of that. It has to do with some other aspect. It's like you could be the best car mechanic in the world, even if you believed that the internal combustion engine was created by magic in the 5th century by fairies. You would have a view that is untestable, that you can't demonstrate, but it wouldn't change that you could still do and be a mechanic. But I think what you're talking about is if somebody has an idea about God and they're trying to use science to debunk other science, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if the science that they do to show that other science is wrong, if that science is reliable, it doesn't matter whether it originated from their real or misguided view of a God. And it doesn't matter, because the science is agnostic about beliefs that don't impact that. I think what we really need is, and we kind of tried to get to this, an example of where you think a creationist is doing science on behalf of a God belief or some sort of supernatural belief that is leading him to debunk science, and that's not being accepted, I think. I mean, we may have too many factors in this now. I really like to understand what you're saying.
Well, I guess I'm sorry, I don't mean to muddy the waters, or this just kind of came out of the discussions with my son, and kind of discussing some of the things that he brought to my attention, and a lot of the disagreement came on about, like, well, who should be an accurate authority in science? If you find you can take somebody like,
no person is the authority in science. There's no such thing as the authority an authority in science.
The data is the data are the information that we point to. To say something is true because Neil deGrasse Tyson said so, that's a shortcut that we'll take on occasion, because let's be honest, if Neil deGrasse Tyson says something about astrophysics, the odds are good that he's accurately reporting the best understanding of astrophysicists. But it has nothing to do with whether or not he says it or if anybody says it. It doesn't matter if every astrophysicist on the planet all got together and said, yes, this is true, wah ha 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 ha, we all agree. If that conflicts with the actual data, then they're wrong.
Well, okay, yeah, I think I completely agree with that. There's no point of disagreement there. So, like, if you want a specific example, we could take let's take the efforts of the Discovery Institute or their science department or their intelligent design department. do you think that categorically, like all of that should be labeled as pseudoscientific, or do you think they're trying to do good science, but it's falling short, or do you think it's something else?
They have no scientific findings that I'm aware of. What the Discovery Institute is doing, like for example, I know one of the individuals went and got an actual PhD in geology, which all that is I'm going to do the work and report the answers they say, and now works to undermine all of the geology that he actually studied and got his degree. But maybe I'm missing something. What scientific presentation has ever come out of the Discovery Institute that supports their findings of or their ideas of an intelligent designer?
Yeah, sure. And feel free to, cream me on this, because I'm not a scientist and I haven't studied this stuff, but I do frequent their website. And so, I've seen some very interesting things brought up. I don't even think I'm smart enough to accurately relay it on this call, but, they, like, for example, there was a debate between James Tour and Dave Farina. And so I was looking into some stuff about origin of life. And then I was thinking about, like, wow, it's really, like, kind of seems like it's really unknown where life came from. And that's a very interesting concept. And so it kind of opened the door to, like, reading other articles about maybe there is a God, or where did we come from, So I am a layman and I don't have a degree. My son's taking anthropology and we argue about God all the time. So I'm kind of taking a soft stance, but I'm just trying to be genuine with where I'm coming from.
I'm just wondering, because I want some scientific finding from the Discovery Institute, because I'm not aware of any. I'm aware of the Discovery Institute wanting to teach the controversy. I'm aware of the Discovery Institute lying and changing when the courts ruled they couldn't teach creationism, and they changed every instance of the word creationism to they were going to change it to intelligent design, or they changed creationists to intelligent design proponents in order to get around the law. And we know that they did this because we found an intermediate or an intermediate form where they went through and cut and pasted, and it became design proponentsists. And so they left that transitional relic in there, which is how we know that they just flat out took everything they said and figured if they changed creationists to intelligent design proponents, that this would get them around the law, because they're wanting to teach creationism, but it does not qualify as science. They have a strategy. They are a conservative political group. They, to my knowledge, have not produced anything that is a proper scientific finding subjected to peer review that supports intelligent design in any significant way. It's one thing. So, for example, do you think biologists working on evolution sat down and said, we want to counter creationism, let's work towards this alternate view? Or do you think those scientists evaluated the evidence honestly, followed the proposals, and supported evolution?
I think for the most part, it was a genuine effort. I don't think there's anything like nefarious going on. I think the wife of what do you remember that old program Cosmos?
Carl Sagan.
Carl
his wife's
Sagan.
Andrew.
His wife. Yeah, she had a controversial take on evolution. I think that wasn't accepted for a long time, and then it came around that she was actually correct, and then they actually adopted what she was saying.
And how did they find that out, Brandon? How did they find out she was correct?
Well, I think I see where you're going with this. They probably just, were honest and followed the data. And
did they pray about it? No.
Maybe some of them did. I don't know.
They did science. The reason they found the reason she would have been vindicated, I don't even know the specific story, but this is the point that people always, when they bring up, well, science was shown to be wrong. And then you ask them, by what mechanism? Because it wasn't a church. It was science.
I argued with my son about this too, and he told me that that's actually the beautiful thing about science is science, updates itself, it corrects itself.
Yes, it's not dogma. If it is shown to be wrong, that is greeted with reward. It's a good way to make a lot of money. But and the thing that you've been talking about this whole time is like the Discovery Institute. You had mentioned things about blood platelets. You had mentioned things about dating and stuff. And I recognize what you think you're engaging with as being science, which are these fake debunks. And we see them all the time. And I think what you think is science is somebody saying something along the lines, evolution can't be true because it violates the second law of thermodynamics. Is that one you're familiar with, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm familiar with
and it's a very popular one, and it's been in multiple books. And the thing that places like the Discovery Institute, the thing they want is for you to stop there and not listen to a single scientist who actually knows what the second law of thermodynamics is. Because if you say something stupid like, chaos can never create order, you're an idiot. But that isn't doing science. That isn't scientists doing rejected science. That is people playing word problems with terms from science, thinking that they can basically trick their way with some limericks through and take down a system that is in direct opposition to their belief. The reason why the Discovery Institute doesn't fight science with science is because they can't. They lose every time. So they fight science with fake science term-laden bullshit. And that's what you're engaging with and asking, I think, why are we rejecting the thinkers like Josh Feuerstein? Science can never.
Jimmy and I are on two completely different pages at the moment. Let me finish my thought, and then you can try and address both of them. The Discovery Institute has a strategy and a goal. The goal is to defend a creationist worldview and oppose the science of evolution. They see the science of evolution as a threat, and that is their strategy, that is their goal. Science doesn't have any goal but finding the truth. And the interesting thing is, if the Discovery Institute actually did science that disproved and showed problems with evolution, non-Discovery Institute scientists would accept that because their goal is to accept whatever is true about the world. The Discovery Institute has an ideology, and that is what is driving them to try to prove this other view is wrong. And even if the Discovery Institute did real science, proved evolution was wrong, and all non-Discovery Institute scientists universally accepted that, that would still not in any way demonstrate the truth of their view about God at all. But they don't do that. They have not done what it takes. So despite the fact that they've got this strategy and supposedly God on their side, they've made no progress in shutting down the scientific truth from the massive, like the Discovery Institute, teeny, tiny, compared to the massive group of scientists that understand and accept scientific evolution.
I appreciate that, and I definitely see where that could be the case because, as I'm sure, I think I heard on the previous call that you used to be a Christian, so I know you're familiar with the old Christians want to do things to build their faith sort of thing, so they sort of gravitate to the things that are going to reinforce their theistic views. And
in fairness, everybody wants to do that with their beliefs. To fight against confirmation bias is something you have to learn to do, and you'll never escape it completely.
I guess maybe in order to take this in a productive direction, maybe I could say something like, well, if you're struggling with doubt, but there's something appealing about theism to you, there's some theological appeal there, like, whatever it is, take your pick. God's word is the same today, forever, and always. But science is constantly changing or has to update itself. And I appreciate that solid rock of the rock of ages of the Bible. And let's say you find yourself there, and then you're also a scientist and you're familiar with all the literature. And then you come to a position of a person like Kenneth Miller, who I'm sure you guys are familiar with from the Dover trial, where he actually argues against intelligent design often, but I believe he's a Catholic or something, maybe even like William Lane Craig, who he kind of argues as an apologist for Christianity all the time, but he definitely believes in old Earth and evolution and things like that. Do you take a hostile approach toward that belief, or do you look at that as more legitimate, or do you think that that's illogical too, or doesn't hold up, or doesn't hold water as well? What's your position on that?
Kenneth Miller was critical to the Dover trial. He's a Catholic, and he understands that intelligent design and creationism are not science and do not deserve. They do not rise to the level of science and should not be taught in science classrooms, because what we teach in science classrooms should be the best findings of science, not religious ideology. I have no problem with Kenneth Miller's take. I have no problem with Kenneth Miller's take on the science. I would disagree with Kenneth vehemently on whether or not there's a God. But the people who take comfort in God and the Bible being the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow, while science keeps changing, have overlooked something important. All that means is religion suffers from continuing to be wrong, whereas science does not suffer from that and can continue to improve and be more correct. That's the difference. A static view of the world suggests that, Bronze Era goat herders who think they got a message from God got it right, and there's no need to ever update it. Science updates because it is honest and because its only goal is to find the truth. Religion doesn't update because religion doesn't care for reliable methods of finding the truth. Religion cares about maintaining the dogma.
Brendan, were you trying to ask, though, whether or not we don't feel a need to check? I think you were trying to say there are Christians out there who are scientifically minded, they're more scientifically progressive or progressive generally. Do we give these people a pass and not challenge that and retain our judgment of their beliefs because they aren't as radical? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, kind of. Like, basically, does God rise to the level of a legitimate idea in your view? Or is everybody that, wants to believe in it irrational or clearly demonstrated as being wrong?
No. And we're not claiming we've demonstrated that God is wrong. God is an unfalsifiable proposition. It would be a mistake to claim I've falsified it. But the bigger mistake is in believing that it's true. You don't have unless I've missed something, and which is why I've been hosting shows and having people call in to present their evidence and argument for almost 20 years. There's no good reason to believe that God is real. And if people run around saying, I believe that God is real, either they should be able to demonstrate that easily to the rest of us, or they are irrational at some point.
Is it? Let's say I'll play with you here a little bit. Is it a good reason to believe in God because you were born into a country and all of your neighbors believe in God as well?
Do you think that's a good reason?
One of the dumbest reasons to believe in a God.
Yeah, Brandon.
Why?
Okay, I was born in the United States, and I have a friend who was born in Iran. And because of that, we were raised to believe in two different gods. Which of us got it right, and how do you know that based on which country we were in?
Well, that's not even what Brandon's asking, I think. Brandon's just asking if it's okay, like if it's fine to do that. Right?
Yeah, because
I'm explaining why it's not. I'm explaining why it's not fine, because there is no fucking causal connection between where you're born and whether there's a God, is there?
Well, let's say that if I may, and cut me off if this is going in the wrong direction, but let's say that you took an approach that we're just a Homo sapien and we're just like a species, and our species happen to evolve tribes and religions, and the culture that I happen to find myself in is a Christian one. So why fight against that I've evolved into?
Whether or not you fight against it isn't the question. The question is that a good reason to believe that something is true?
Well, I mean, a lot of people do believe it in this country, so why?
Do you think that a lot of people believing something is a good reason to believe that something is true?
In some cases, like if it's
No. It is a logical fallacy. It is a logical fallacy called argumentum ad populum, appeal to the popularity of an idea. The truth of an idea is not impacted in any way by the number of people who believe it, how long they believed it, how sincerely they believe it. If you believe it is logically sound to believe that something is true because a lot of people believe it, you are demonstrably wrong. You are engaging in a logical fallacy.
Well, maybe it's not maybe it can't be demonstrated to be logically sound, but people can live life good enough based on good enough beliefs.
But Brandon,
I don't give a fuck about good enough. I want to know if it's true. And if it's illogical, which is my claim, my claim was if people believe in God, either they should be able to demonstrate it or they are being illogical. And now you're just agreeing, they're being illogical, but I guess it's good enough. I don't think that's good enough. I care about what's true, don't you?
That's what I was going to ask. Is Brandon, do you care whether or not something you believe is true or not? Do you believe that society gets better as it accepts more true things and less false things?
I personally do. I think I do. Yes.
So
I could be fooling myself.
Why would you defend if for a society to transition to a state of more truth would require individuals many times over to stop believing the untrue things and start believing the true things, right?
Well, yeah, but let's say you were born into a family that was very Christian, and the most responsible, best people in your life were Christian, and the only atheist people you knew were the bratty teens.
Why are we making up hypotheticals? You're making up a hypothetical about a societal advantage that, what if you become like the mean teens? Okay, you shouldn't become an asshole. You should seek all of the things that are true. And being a mean atheist teenager isn't the alternative truth to Christianity.
I'm just saying, why should I go the way of my son or the way I did when I was younger? What about
this isn't a choice, Brandon, this isn't a choice. Atheism isn't a choice. You don't dabble in atheism. You are either convinced that a God actually exists or you are not convinced that a God actually exists. This isn't something you have control over. You are either convinced that the claim some God exists is true or you are not convinced. The thing that you're talking about now is stop and wait. The thing that you're talking about now is if I was born into a family and they're predominantly Christian and everybody who I knew was good was Christian and everybody who I knew who was an atheist was awful, isn't that a good reason to believe? No, it's not a good reason to believe that it's true. It may be a good reason to go along with it. It may be a good reason to prefer one group of people over another, but it's not good reason to believe that something is true. Here's the proposition. Some God exists. If you are convinced that proposition is true, you are a theist of some stripe, Christian or otherwise. And if you are not convinced, you're an atheist. This isn't an act of volition. There's no choice here. There's no dabbling.
Is there periods of doubt?
Sure. Are you convinced that there's a God?
Well, I'm definitely taking the side of that right now in this interlocutor.
That's not what I asked. That's not what I asked, and I would appreciate it if you just answer the question that you're asked. Are you actually convinced? Okay.
Yes.
What convinces you that a God exists?
Well, if you want me to have a good answer to that question, then I have to say no, I guess. No, I'm not convinced. Because if by
congratulations,
definition,
you're an atheist.
Well, so would you say somebody like Jordan Peterson, who maybe thinks that Christianity is good for society, but he doesn't believe in an actual God, he's an atheist?
I don't think I've sat down and had dinner with the man and sat down with him on stage to millions of viewers now. I don't think that either you nor me have a good understanding of what Jordan Peterson thinks, nor do I give a flying fuck what that batshit lunatic thinks about a God. This is about what is reasonable to believe, what is demonstrated by evidence, and whether or not you believe it.
Well, what if I just want to suspend my mind like the Bible says and I want to accept it by faith? What if I want to be one of those lunatics?
The Bible doesn't say that.
Are you sure?
Pretty damn. Where does it say that?
Well, I thought that somewhere in the Bible it says you don't rely on your own mind or your own feelings because the heart.
It says lean not on your own understanding, but that doesn't say that you suspend your mind. I think there are plenty of Christians out there who would find it really offensive that you're suggesting that they don't and can't have a good reason. They have to suspend their brain and they just rely on faith. But your question I'll just take as rendered, which is, what if you want to do that? If you want to do that, Brandon, it's fine. You don't have to care about the truth. You don't have to have good standards of evidence. You don't have to have good reasons for your belief. If you just manage to convince yourself that I'll just throw out science and reason and logic and I don't care if something is true and I'll just go with what my family taught me, you are welcome to do that. But you are being irrational and you have no good sound evidence to stand on. And I don't understand why you do that. Would you cross the street?
I learned my language.
Would you cross the street, a busy highway, blindfolded?
No.
What if you didn't believe a bus was coming? If you didn't believe a bus was coming, are you right? No, that would be illogical to do that and to just assume that. Why is it you care less about your eternal potential future and whether or not there's a God than you do about crossing the street? What if you heard a voice in your head that said, I am the Lord thy God, put on this blindfold and walk across the street?
Well, I guess it's really just wanting to be faithful to my father. I mean, that's irrational according to you. But what if that's how Homo sapiens are supposed to be?
What do you mean how they're supposed to be? Why is it that the truth
or how they're just observed to be, how they're supposed to be?
No, I don't care how they observe to be. It doesn't matter how humans are observed to be. Humans do all kinds of irrational things, and people try desperately to please their fathers, and I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing on the whole, but I know in individual situations it's absolutely fucking awful in some of them, and it's probably okay in others. But I care about the truth.
If you love your father.
What?
If you loved your father and,
I love my father. I love my father. I love my father. My father will forever be disappointed that I am working in the service of Satan in his mind. But me following him would be stupid and irrational because his beliefs are stupid and irrational.
Oh, that's fair.
If you're fine being stupid and irrational, go for it. But some of us care about truth.
I don't feel stupid enough.
Wait, but Brandon, I'm worried about the implication of your question. Are you trying to find justification to suggest that you should believe because your father believed, or you've mentioned your son, that your son should give up his beliefs, his honestly found beliefs, to adopt your beliefs? And is that the type of way you love your son? Do you think, by the way, my dad is like that, has explicitly said so, essentially, that I should just pretend to believe and fake it until I make it because it's what he's passed down to me. So is that how you feel about your son or how you feel about your father?
Well, I told my son that I went through a period of doubt just like he did, and that my father...
But just answer my question. Yeah. Just answer my question. Are you saying that about your father, or are you saying it about your son?
I was saying what again? I'm sorry.
Asking whether or not it's okay to believe on the basis that your father believes.
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question. I'm a little slow here, but basically, I think that my son has the right to believe whatever he wants, and everybody does.
Right, but you were asking if it's justified to believe in response to us talking about your beliefs and asking about your beliefs. It seemed like you were suggesting at first that you want to hold on to this belief because it's the belief you got from your dad. Was that what you were saying?
Yeah, essentially, I think that's in a nutshell.
And you believe your father loved you and would want that for you?
Well, yes, I do.
But so How would you feel if your son felt compelled to believe what you believe, even though he can't honestly come to it, and you knew that he was only doing it, living against what he actually believed was true, because he felt he should because you believed it? You think that was good or bad?
That's a good question. You posed that well. I would say that's probably, on the whole, the way you framed it there, it's going to be bad, because
it's also foundational for abuse, just so you know. This is how abuse works. I'm not calling your father abusive, but this is how family abuse, it is so often, we often refer to it as patriarchal or authoritarian, where you have the one person who gets to issue the identities, and reward and punishment is sort of issued out, and that reward and punishment can be mild. It's still considered abusive, but it can be mild in the form of just approval or disapproval, sort of, or it can be more extreme, where it comes in forms of physical abuse. Again, I don't know you. I'm not saying anything about your father, but I'm telling you that you're talking about systems that are ripe for abuse. And so to ask us, would it be okay to believe on that basis, would be to basically ask us if we're okay with something that is foundational for authoritarian abuse that you see expressed, especially in family units and especially in religious family units. And the more religious, the more fundamentalist religious the family is, the higher the likelihood you find those systems of abuse. So no, I'm not okay with that justification.
I got kind of an interesting take on that. Feel free to field this if you want. What if our patriarchal way of doing that contributed to the evolution of Homo sapiens themselves? Like, what if that contributed to our large brain size in our society today?
Whether or not you could prove to me that the fact that we were religious stopped us from going extinct, and I would still say that doesn't mean we should be religious today. Even if you could prove that. What?
You wouldn't say that was illogical?
Why would I assume that the religion of the past would be necessary to save us in the future? If you prove to me that in some past point we would have gone extinct, except had we not been Hindu or some religion, that would not have an implication on today.
Oh, okay, well, that's fair. I mean, I think one could make the case that it helped or it didn't help or it was a neutral thing. So you're saying
it doesn't matter.
More of a neutral. Yeah, like
it doesn't matter. So first of all, you're engaging in a bunch of what ifs and what abouts, and maybe it was useful. I don't give a fuck if it was useful. I give a fuck if it was true.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes, when you cast a wide net in these different ways of thinking, that's how you discover something new and intriguing and a new idea.
Okay, when you discover something new and intriguing that isn't the most pedestrian thing that I've dealt with every fucking weekend for 20 years, let me know.
All right. Yes, sir. I'm working on it. I appreciate you guys. I won't take up any more of your time.
There's nothing new or novel in maybes. If you were to actually demonstrate, hey, we found a very wonderful, useful, important aspect of religion. Cool. I would agree. I would say, hey, yeah, you found a wonderful, useful, important aspect of religion. But is the religious claim true? That's what I care about. And nothing you've said either demonstrates that it is true, or that you have any good reason to think it's true, or that you even give a crap if it's true. You are so desperate to find some way to make it something you can hang on to that you don't care if it's true. And that's what I find so frustrating, because despite what you say, you're not dumb. This is not a problem. You have some baggage, and you desperately want and need to hang on to religion for reasons that you can't justify and you can't show that it's true. And all I've asked over and over again is it true? And you not only don't seem to care, but don't seem to know of any way to show whether or not it's true. That's the part that boggles my mind.
I don't think anything that would be convincing to you, but
well, of course, congratulations on the most common cop-out. The most common cop-out after being called out is that it wouldn't be convincing to me. Hang on. Why wouldn't it be convincing to me? Is it because I'm irrational or because you're irrational?
Probably because I'm irrational.
There you go.
Can,
Why are you okay with being irrational?
I'll tell you why. I actually haven't answered that question. I thought about it. So why am I okay being irrational? Because I find myself in the exact same position that a lot of people that I admire, great men, not my father, let's say Johann Sebastian Bach, or let's say Sir Isaac Newton, a lot of great men who think that there's a sky daddy up there, and they don't see, they don't have some existential crisis that they're a Christian or that they believe in something that's wacky, and so why should I?
You said, sir, they didn't have a crisis because of something wacky?
To believe what Johann Sebastian Bach
Brandon, you said
Isaac Newton believed.
Yeah, Isaac Newton believes in alchemy, and they believe the mercury in his system contributed to his death.
And we have chemistry because of that.
No, not because of alchemy. Because of alchemy?
We don't have chemistry because of
the precursor to chemistry?
He was the father of physics.
But I mean, wasn't alchemy the precursor to chemistry?
No.
Playing around with things does not chemistry make. The fact you might as well say that we have insulin because somebody tried other things first.
Thank God they did. I mean, thank God.
No, you dumbass. The other things didn't contribute to this. You don't get to take 20 failures and say that we couldn't get to the right answer without those 20 failures unless those 20 failures necessarily led in a causal foundation to that final success. Alchemy did not lead to the success and understanding of chemistry. But meanwhile, you're basically saying that because there were some other smart people who didn't have an existential crisis, which, by the way, how the fuck do you know they didn't? True. And second of all, what difference does it make if they didn't have an existential crisis? You know who doesn't have an existential crisis? People who don't fucking know or care if they're wrong.
It's not even an argument ad populum at this point. It's argument ad celebrity. I want to be in this specific club.
Well, I'm in the club with a bunch of people who were smart about a few things and really stupid about one thing. So I'm going to join them in the thing that they were stupid about. Why not join them in the things they were smart about and set aside the stupid things? And then you can be better.
How do you distinguish which is which? How do you listen to the mass?
I just told you. I've been telling you for 41 minutes and 50. I've been telling you for 41 minutes and 58 seconds. You need to care about the truth and use the best methods of finding the truth, but you don't.
Or else what? You might write St. Matthew's Passion by Bach, or else what?
Now
you might write some great concertos or some good religion.
I wonder how many of these fallacies you're going to run through before the thing's over. By the way, there are lots of very great...
I want to cry right now at how your brain has been consumed by something that does not care about truth, doesn't give a shit about how to find truth, doesn't have any interest in becoming better or being better, and you think because somebody wrote a beautiful piece of music that this somehow justifies believing irrational bullshit to the point where you won't even listen to people when they're telling you how to tell the difference. I'm sorry for what religion has done to you.
Real quick though, Brandon, have you heard the Broadway play musical Matilda? Have you heard the music track from that?
Perhaps, yeah. I like Into the Woods or Sweeney Todd, but I think I've heard Matilda.
Yeah. Do you recall that it's a very, very well put together Broadway musical? That it's very beautiful. It sounds incredible. Wait, how could you imagine? It was written by an atheist. Tim Minchin not only doesn't believe in God, he constantly makes fun of it. And yet, it's one of the best soundtracks to ever come out of Broadway. But what do you mean you can imagine it was great? It was written by an atheist. Where did he get that inspiration?
I was not trying to say that atheists can't do great things.
We have the history we have. The religiously inspired music from the past exists, whether or not everybody leaves religion or not. All of that and all those foundations still exist. The future will still have great artists and great musicians, regardless whether or not those people adhere to it. You're basically pointing to the past and going, aren't you glad those things exist? As though if they didn't exist and other stuff existed instead, we wouldn't say, aren't you glad those? If you didn't have a son and instead you had a daughter because a different sperm made it to the egg, wouldn't you be glad she exists?
Yes.
Then this is a stupid point.
Well, okay, maybe you're right. You guys are very
No, it's
sharp,
not maybe. That's definitely right.
Okay. wrecked. Good job. You roasted me. I appreciate you guys, and I'll call in and listen in, and thank you for...
Just call with something better next time, bud. But I'm glad that you're not doing to your son what your father's doing to you.
Until you care about the truth, don't call in and waste my time, because that's what I care about. If you have beliefs and you don't care if they're true, don't waste my motherfucking time. Don't waste the audience's time. Don't waste anybody's time. I dropped it.
Okay.
If you, like, I'm happy for people to call in and say, here's what I believe and why. And then if they say, and I don't care if it's true, cool, thanks.
Right.
Whatever. I appreciate you got your 10 seconds or whatever on air. That was 40 minutes of a genuine conversation where at every single point, his questions were asked and answered about science, about epistemology, about how do you tell something's truth, about, all this. And at every turn, it was, well, maybe I don't care about truth. Maybe this is just useful. Maybe this was important. Maybe this is what's got us out of this. Maybe I'm going to side with somebody who wrote something beautiful. Okay, fine. You don't give a shit about any of the things that you asked about. You are an absolutely 100% dishonest interlocutor when you ask questions and then get the answers that are correct and dismiss them because you prefer something else. I'm happy to hear what people believe and why. The why is the important part.
Yep.
If you believe that Jesus is the Son of God who came down and sacrificed himself to save you, and you believe that because it makes you feel good, congratulations. You have an unassailable belief that is not demonstrably true, that makes you irrational for accepting it. Rationality is not a feeling. Logic is not something we pulled out of our ass. Sound epistemology, to have good reasons for belief, is not just a fucking hunch. There needs to be a method. If you want to say, here's a phenomenon, and I think it's caused by this, you need to be able to demonstrate that what you're pointing to is a possible thing, that it possibly exists, that it plausibly exists, that it probably exists, and then show that it possibly, plausibly, and then probably has a causal connection. You can't explain things by pointing to mysteries. You can't say, I think it's magic. If your explanation for something boils down to it's magic, you have explained nothing. We explain things in terms of other things that we understand. We don't explain things in terms, you can't solve a mystery by appealing to a bigger mystery.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that'll end this call here. Amir in Birmingham, UK, him is a theist who says that God is a good explanation for anything that exists. And to think otherwise is very ignorant. So, how can God, and which God, be an explanation for my glasses?